What if everything we know about human history is only the latest version of the narrative, not the first, not even the second, but one of many chapters in a series of worlds that have repeatedly risen and disappeared? Entire civilizations, more advanced than we can imagine, may have existed long before us and then been erased from the face of the earth, leaving behind almost nothing. If history has been reset more than once, how real is our past, and how much has simply been erased? History is a cycle, not a line. Most people imagine history as one long continuous line. We begin with hunter-gatherers, then agriculture, cities, states, industry, and finally the modern world. It is a neat story, logical and complete. But what if in reality it is not one straight line, but a series of lines, each abruptly cut off, only to begin again from scratch? The idea of multiple resets of history sounds incredible, but when you think about it, it becomes clear. Everything we know is based only on what survived. We piece together history from fragments, stone artifacts, shards of pottery, old buildings, texts not destroyed by time. And here lies the problem: almost everything humans create eventually disappears. Steel rusts, concrete crumbles, books turn to dust in just a few millennia. Nature completely absorbs any trace of human activity. Imagine a civilization as advanced as ours, or even more advanced, that existed long ago and then vanished. For it to leave practically nothing behind would require very little: a global flood, a volcanic eruption, a climate shift, or a world war. Cities, archives, technologies could be erased in an astonishingly short time, thousands of years later. Only a few strange artifacts buried deep underground would remain. Official history looks too tidy. In schools it is presented as a polished structure: early humans in caves learning to make tools, then agriculture, settlements becoming cities, cities forming empires, technology steadily improving, and we reach modernity. It looks logical, almost like an inevitable process, but real life rarely develops in a straight line. Progress is chaotic, unpredictable, full of dead ends. Civilizations rise and fall, discoveries are forgotten, entire ways of life vanish instantly. Yet official chronology shows history as a smooth linear ascent without serious breaks or inexplicable leap. This should raise questions. History has been rewritten many times, not necessarily through conspiracies, but through necessity. Records were destroyed, rewritten by victors, or shaped by the values of the time. The further back we go, the more uncertain everything becomes. Historians are forced to fill gaps with educated guesses. These guesses enter textbooks and over time become fixed as facts, even when new discoveries should revise them. Traces of forgotten epochs. If history has been reset more than once, there must be traces somewhere in the world, faint, scattered signs of earlier civilizations. Göbekli Tepe in modern Turkey dates to about 11,000 years ago, much earlier than. According to standard chronology, complex societies should have appeared. There stand massive stone pillars, some weighing over 20 tons, decorated with fine carvings of animals. Hunter-gatherers of that time, by traditional measures, could not have created such things. There are megalithic structures all over the world: giant stone platforms in Baalbek, Lebanon, perfectly cut stone in Sacsayhuam in Peru, flawlessly carved basalt columns in Nanmadol, Micronesia. The size, precision, and scale of these works are difficult to explain even today. If history has been reset, these may be remnants of techniques mastered in a previous epoch and imperfectly passed down after catastrophe. There are also artifacts that seem far too advanced for their time. The Antikythera mechanism, a Greek device found in a shipwreck, is often called the first analog computer. It could predict astronomical positions and eclipses with astonishing accuracy. It is dated to more than 2,000 years ago. Yet nothing similar appears in the records for centuries afterward. How did such a complex mechanism emerge out of nowhere, only to vanish? Ancient maps also contain strange details. The Piri's map, created in the 16th century, appears to show the coastline of Antarctica without ice. If true, it suggests knowledge from a time when Antarctica was not yet frozen. Myths and oral traditions as evidence. Legends from different cultures speak of great cities, golden ages that ended in catastrophe. Atlantis is the most famous example of a legendary society that sank beneath the sea, but similar stories exist in Sumerian, Indian, Native American, and Polynesian traditions. They may be fantasy or blurred memories of real civilizations destroyed long before us. Australian Aboriginal traditions tell of times when the shoreline was much farther out than today. Of land swallowed by the sea. Modern science confirms that sea levels rose dramatically at the end of the last ice age, about 12,000 years ago. If these stories truly reach back to that time, they may be among the oldest continuous human records of real environmental change across the Pacific Islands. There are countless oral traditions of giant waves that swallowed villages and reshaped coastlines. Some align with geological evidence of tsunamis caused by undersea earthquakes or volcanic eruptions. Indigenous tribes of the Pacific coast of America tell of a great earthquake and wave that devastated coastal settlements. These accounts match precisely what geologists now call the Cascadia earthquake around the year 1700 CE. Natural forces as erasers of time. If resets occurred, something must have been powerful enough to cause them. These are not local disasters, but events on a planetary scale. Nature is the most obvious candidate. Earth is not a static place, it is a planet in constant motion. Massive volcanic eruptions can darken the skies, disrupt climate, and bury entire regions in ash. Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE buried Pompeii so suddenly that people were frozen in ash for nearly 2,000 years. Imagine something hundreds of times larger. The eruption of Toba in Indonesia about 74,000 years ago likely triggered a global volcanic winter. If a thriving civilization existed, its cities could have been buried, farms destroyed, survivors scattered. Earthquakes are another ruthless eraser. They can destroy buildings, reshape landscapes, and sink lands beneath the sea. Entire cities have vanished into fissures or been swept away by landslides. Over centuries, tectonic shifts can bury ancient structures deep underground, hiding them until accidental discovery. Water may be the most thorough eraser of all. On a local scale, floods are devastating, but in the past sea levels rose sharply. At the end of the last ice age, melting glaciers forced the oceans to swallow entire coastal regions. Some researchers believe that vast areas now underwater, such as the drowned lands of Doggerland between Britain and continental Europe, were once home to thriving human communities. If a civilization was based on coastlines, as ours is, a sudden rise in sea level could erase almost every trace. There are also cosmic threats. Asteroid impacts are rare, but when they occur, they instantly change the planet. The asteroid that struck near modern Mexico 66 million years ago wiped out the dinosaurs and many other forms of life. Even a much smaller impact could have devastating consequences for human civilization. War as an eraser of knowledge. War not only destroys in the moment of battle, but also deliberately erases knowledge. Armies throughout history have destroyed libraries, temples, archives, whether to erase the enemy's history or simply as an act of rage. The burning of the Library of Alexandria is the most famous example, but far from the only one. Countless other repositories of knowledge were lost through conquest and conflict, taking with them information that could have told us much about the past. During the fall of the Roman Empire, Europe lost access to technologies and knowledge that had been commonplace for centuries: aqueducts, concrete, advanced architecture, even medical practices. All were forgotten or ignored for hundreds of years. If this could happen in recorded history, it is not hard to imagine much larger collapses in the deep past that completely erase knowledge. The problem of disappearing records. When we think about understanding the past, we imagine history preserved somewhere in books, on stone tablets, in museums just waiting to be read. But the truth is that the record of our history is fragile. It doesn't take much for it to vanish. Most of human history has already disappeared, not because someone deliberately destroyed it, but because time is merciless. The first problem: most of what humans create is made of materials that do not last long. Paper, cloth, wood, even many metals decay under the influence of moisture, sunlight, or air. A single fire, flood, or insect infestation can destroy centuries of records in hours. Even in our modern world, where we store information digitally, the problem remains. Hard drives fail, formats become obsolete, servers are useless without electricity. Written history goes back about 5,000 years, but humans in their modern form have existed for around 300,000 years. That leaves a vast gap, filled only with scattered artifacts and countless assumptions. We assume the pre-writing period was pre-civilizational, but largely because we have no records from it. If complex societies existed before writing or before the records we know, they may have left almost nothing for us. Stone carvings and monuments last longer than paper or wood, but they are not eternal. Wind, water, earthquakes, and erosion wear them down in just a few thousand years. Inscriptions can become unreadable. Entire buildings can collapse and be buried in dense jungles or shifting deserts. Ruins can vanish completely from sight. Repeated inventions in history. An intriguing pattern in human history is that certain discoveries and inventions appear multiple times, often in different places and at different times. Usually this is explained as independent invention. When people face similar problems, they eventually find similar solutions. But it also opens another possibility that some inventions are not new at all, but rediscoveries of knowledge once known in earlier epochs before reset. Writing appeared independently in several regions: Sumer, ancient Egypt, the Indus Valley, China, and Mesoamerica. Each system differed in style and symbols, yet all marked a sudden leap from oral tradition to recorded history, as if the idea of writing emerged fully formed. Metallurgy follows a similar pattern. The smelting of copper, bronze, and iron appeared in different parts of the world at different times, sometimes separated by thousands of years. The process is complex, involving mining, high-temperature smelting, and the creation of durable alloys. It is possible these skills were learned, lost, and relearned multiple times. Agriculture shows the same template. We are told it began about 10,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent. Yet archaeological evidence reveals that the domestication of plants and animals occurred independently in East Asia, Africa, the Americas, and the Pacific Islands. This may reflect human adaptability or suggest that farming was practiced long before our accepted timeline, only to be reintroduced after a reset. The fragility of modern civilization. It is tempting to believe our world is indestructible. We have skyscrapers, airplanes crossing oceans in hours, satellites linking the globe, and machines capable of producing almost anything. We imagine that once a civilization reaches this level of complexity, it is too advanced to collapse like those before it. But on closer inspection, our world is far more fragile than it appears. Modern life depends on layers of interconnected systems, each relying on the other to survive. Food supply depends on transport. Transport depends on fuel. Fuel production depends on electricity. Electricity depends on a functioning industrial base. If one layer fails critically, it can trigger a chain reaction that brings down the rest. In major cities, grocery stores typically hold only a few days' worth of food. If trucks stop arriving, shelves empty in less than a week. Without electricity, refrigerators fail. Without clean water and sanitation, disease spreads. These are immediate processes, they unfold within days. Dependence on digital technology makes us even more vulnerable. Banking, communication, trade, healthcare, almost everything relies on computer systems that can be disrupted by cyber attacks, power failures, or natural disasters. If the internet were to go down globally for even a few weeks, the consequences would be catastrophic. We also live in an era of just-in-time manufacturing, where parts and materials arrive at factories exactly when needed, with minimal storage. This keeps costs low but leaves almost no buffer if the flow is interrupted. A major disaster, natural or human-made, could halt production in key industries and unravel the entire global economy. In some ways, ancient civilizations were more resilient. They relied on local resources, grew most of their own food, and often survived disruptions in trade. Our interconnected world gives us extraordinary capabilities, but it also means we are all tied to the same network. And if that network breaks, everyone feels it. The digital blackout scenario. One of the most plausible and immediate triggers for a modern reset is a sudden global digital shutdown. We live in an age where nearly every part of civilization is tied to digital systems. Remove them and the modern world doesn't just slow down, it stops. A digital blackout could happen in several ways. A massive solar storm, similar to the Carrington event of 1859, could unleash a surge of charged particles that disable satellites, disrupt GPS, and overload power grids. Back then, it only knocked out telegraph systems. Today, it would cripple the technology that controls almost everything. Another possibility is a large-scale cyber attack, a coordinated effort to disable or damage critical systems across multiple countries at once. Are cascading failures, where one system collapses and triggers a chain reaction that spreads far beyond the initial problem. The impact would be immediate. Phones would fall silent, ATMs and credit card systems would stop working. Air traffic controllers would lose contact with planes. Stock markets would freeze. Hospitals would be unable to access digital medical records. In the first few days, many would assume it was temporary, but over time the situation would worsen. Supermarkets, without resupply, would quickly empty. Without refrigeration, food would spoil. People would begin fleeing cities en masse, creating traffic jams and chaos. Money would rapidly become an issue. With banks offline, there would be no way to access savings. In a world where most transactions are digital, the loss of electronic payments would halt commerce. People would turn to barter, but such systems would be disorganized and unreliable. Communication would also collapse. Without the internet or mobile networks, news would spread slowly and unevenly. Rumors would replace verified information. People would not know whether the blackout was local or global, caused by a natural disaster, an attack, or something else. Critical infrastructure would struggle to cope. Water treatment plants rely on electricity and digital control systems. Without them, clean water would become scarce within days. Hospitals would be overwhelmed, running on limited generator power until fuel ran out. Emergency services would face shortages of equipment, fuel, and personnel. If the blackout lasted weeks or months, the damage would become irreversible. Factories and distribution centers would shut down permanently. Agricultural systems dependent on machinery, fertilizers, and international trade would falter. Governments would lose the ability to coordinate relief, and some might collapse entirely. Law enforcement would be stretched thin trying to maintain order, leading to surges in crime. After a year of continuous blackout, the world would be unrecognizable. Cities would likely be largely abandoned. Populations would migrate in search of food and safe water. Communities would become more isolated, relying only on what they could produce locally. Most modern technologies would be useless without the complex systems that support them. How history is rewritten after each reset. When a civilization collapses, the immediate focus of survivors is staying alive, finding food, shelter, and safety. Records of the old world, if they survive at all, are usually scattered, damaged, or inaccessible. Over time, as new societies form, something strange happens. The past is rewritten. This is not always intentional. In the early stages, stories of the time before collapse are passed down by the few who remember. These accounts may be accurate at first, but with each retelling, details blur. Stories are simplified, exaggerated, or merged with local myths. Events that were once historical begin to sound like legend. Technologies become magic, cities become palaces of gods. What began as memory turns into myth. We see this process even in recorded history. When the Western Roman Empire fell, people in medieval Europe remembered Rome as a distant golden age, but their understanding was incomplete. They knew the Romans built great roads and cities, but most of the political, scientific, and engineering knowledge that made it possible had been lost. Sometimes rewriting is deliberate. New rulers or cultures may reshape the story of the past to justify their own authority. They might portray the old civilization as corrupt or doomed, presenting their own rise as salvation. Surviving records could be destroyed or altered to eliminate evidence that contradicts their narrative. Religious transformation often plays a role in rewriting. When a new belief system emerges or becomes dominant, it may reinterpret past events in spiritual terms. Disasters could be remembered as divine punishment. Technological wonders might be attributed to gods or supernatural beings. Over time, these interpretations become the official version of history. Language shifts also contribute to rewriting. As a society's language changes, older records become harder to understand. Without careful preservation and translation, the meaning of ancient texts can be lost or distorted. A single mistranslation can alter the entire interpretation of an event. The fragility of our place in time. If history has been reset before, we are living on borrowed chapters. Everything we know, our cities, science, achievements, rests on a foundation far less permanent than we like to believe. Civilizations rise with confidence, imagining their story will last forever. Yet the record of Earth tells a different tale. When we picture the past, we see a straight line stretching from distant ages to us. But if resets occurred, that line is broken, patched together with fragments, full of invisible gaps. Within those gaps may lie entire histories, each with its triumphs, struggles, and eventual end. They may have believed their time was final, just as we do now. And yet, they vanished. The sobering thought is that resets require nothing supernatural or fantastical. Nature alone can do it. A single asteroid, a massive volcanic eruption, or a sudden climate shift could erase the complexity of our world. Humanity itself could bring it about through war, systemic collapse, or technological imbalance. Even without total extinction, enough damage could push us back to simpler ways of living, leaving only traces for the next version of civilization. If that happens, our digital archives, infrastructure, and even monuments may not survive the long passage of time. Thousands of years from now, memory could be reduced to scattered artifacts and stories passed along in ways we cannot control. Future generations might look at us the way we look at Atlantis, half believing, half doubting that we ever existed. The reset cycle hypothesis, when we connect the patterns, vanished civilizations. Sudden leaps in technology, repeated inventions, global myths. Geological evidence of past cataclysms. A larger picture emerges. It suggests that resets in human history may not be rare accidents, but recurring events. The reset cycle hypothesis proposes that civilization follows a repeating pattern: rise, peak, collapse, rebirth, with each cycle erasing most of what came before. History is not a straight line climbing upward, but a loop. Each loop begins with survivors rebuilding after collapse, rediscovering old skills, and developing new ones over generations. Civilizations reach heights of achievement in technology, art, architecture, science, and trade. Yet sooner or later, a combination of threats, natural disasters, climate shifts, famine, disease, or war undermines the foundation. Collapse may come suddenly or unfold slowly across centuries. Either way, the result is the same: the loss of infrastructure, knowledge, and population. Survivors begin again, launching a new cycle. The reason this hypothesis is compelling is that we can see smaller versions of it in recorded history. The fall of the Roman Empire, the collapse of the Maya, the decline of the Indus civilization all followed the pattern of growth, stability, crisis, and reset. In each case, the fall led to the loss of skills and knowledge, recovery of which took centuries. Interestingly, some ancient cultures seem to weave the idea of cycles into their worldview. The Indian concept of yugas describes vast epochs that repeat endlessly. The Maya had their own cyclical calendar, in which worlds are destroyed and created anew. The ancient Greeks spoke of ages of humanity: gold, silver, bronze, and iron, each ending in decline before renewal. These beliefs may not have been purely philosophical. They may have been inspired by observations of past rises and falls. How quickly we forget. When we imagine the collapse of a civilization, it is easy to picture ruins and scattered survivors. What is harder to imagine, and perhaps more important, is how quickly knowledge disappears once the systems that protect and transmit it are gone. Most people assume knowledge is permanently accessible, but in reality it is incredibly fragile. Knowledge lives in people, tools, books, and digital storage. All of these can be lost. If our modern world collapsed today, we would lose the vast majority of information almost instantly. Without electricity, digital records would vanish within decades or less. Without functioning cities, libraries would decay. Without trained experts to pass on complex skills, the chain of understanding would break. The truth is that most people do not understand how the systems around them actually work. We use computers, but only a small fraction could build one from scratch. We drive cars, but few could construct an engine. Even basic necessities, water purification, medicine production, electricity generation are concentrated in specialized fields. If those specialists disappeared, their knowledge would vanish with them. History gives us real examples. After the fall of Rome, much of Europe lost access to technologies that had been commonplace for centuries: concrete, central heating. Advanced plumbing became rare or disappeared entirely. Even the recipe for a certain Roman cement was forgotten for more than 1,000 years. Only in the 15th and 16th centuries were similar materials rediscovered. Isolated communities show us how technology can be lost. In some cases, groups that once had access to metal tools reverted to stone when trade or production ceased. They did not abandon metal because it was inferior, they abandoned it because they no longer had the means to produce it. The speed at which knowledge fades depends on how complex it is and how many people hold it. Everyday skills, farming, fishing, basic construction are more likely to survive because they are widely practiced. But advanced scientific and engineering knowledge is far more vulnerable. If only a few thousand people in the world know how to do something, and they all perish in a collapse, that skill is gone. Language also plays a role. If future generations cannot read the languages of their ancestors, the records we leave behind will be useless. Imagine a library full of books in a language you cannot decipher. The information is there, but it does not exist for those who cannot understand it. We already face this problem with ancient scripts, such as linear, which remains undeciphered despite decades of study. The environment accelerates forgetting. In warm, humid climates, paper and cloth rot quickly. In deserts, winds can bury cities in sand. In jungles, plants and roots can consume entire buildings within decades. Leave a modern city unattended, and in 500 years it could be almost unrecognizable. In 5,000 years, only scattered traces might remain, if anything at all. Without written records, the only way to preserve complex knowledge is through oral tradition. But oral tradition changes over time. Details fade, events are exaggerated, practical instructions are replaced with symbolic stories. The description of a real machine could become a legend of a magical object. The memory of a great flood could become a myth of gods punishing humanity. This is why resets are so effective at erasing the past. When those who understood the old world are gone, the survivors rebuild based only on what they remember and often only on what was necessary for survival. Everything else fades. Within just a few generations, an advanced world that once existed becomes a story of the time before, then a legend, and finally nothing. The voice of history. Myths are not evidence in themselves, but their strange consistency is striking. Across many cultures we hear stories of the first people, golden ages, and catastrophic floods. From the Sumerian flood myth to the biblical tale of Noah, to legends of floods among Native Americans and Pacific Islanders, the theme is the same: the great disaster that erased the world and forced survivors to begin again. If resets truly happened, these myths may be the only surviving records of those early epochs. Instead of being preserved in stone or paper, they lived in human memory, carried across generations, reshaped by culture, yet still echoing real events. The storytellers may not have understood the events themselves, they simply repeated what they had been told. Over time, those memories became the myths we know today. What makes this even more intriguing is that myths from cultures separated by vast distances, with no known contact, often contain remarkably similar themes. Floods, sky gods, lost civilizations appear both in the Americas and the ancient Near East. The idea of cyclical history arose in both Greek and Indian traditions. If these cultures were not directly connected, the simplest explanation may be that they drew from memories of a much older shared past. In this way, myths are like half-buried ruins. Damaged, incomplete, surrounded by debris, but if we dig carefully, we may uncover the foundation of something real. Lessons from forgotten ages. The most humbling thought that the idea of resets brings is not that we are the first advanced society. Several civilizations may have stood here before, looking at their world, believing their progress would last forever. But they vanished. If it happened before, there is no reason to think it cannot happen again. This possibility is both sobering and unsettling. It forces us to question the neat, simple view of history we have been taught, and opens the door to a far stranger, deeper understanding of the past, one in which civilizations can disappear almost without a trace. And the story of the world is written and erased again and again. When we consider the possibility of historical resets, certain things become harder to explain. There are sudden leaps in human progress that seem too fast for their era. There are ancient myths and legends describing catastrophic floods, great fires, or mysterious visitors who taught people the skills of civilization. There are scattered archaeological finds, objects that seem out of place for their age, often dismissed as coincidences or errors in dating. But if resets are real, perhaps these are glimpses of worlds that existed before us. This is not about believing every wild theory or accepting every fringe claim. It is about recognizing how little we truly know. The further back we go, the thinner the evidence becomes. We are like readers trying to make sense of a book when most of its pages are missing. We fill the gaps with what makes sense to us, but that does not mean the story we imagine is real. If history has been reset before, it changes how we think about ourselves. We are not the inevitable endpoint of progress. We are not the most intelligent or advanced beings ever to live here. We are simply the current chapter in an ongoing cycle. That means everything we have built, from the tallest skyscrapers to the most advanced science, could be temporary. It could all be erased. And one day, people or something else might rebuild the world, never knowing that we existed. Hidden layers beneath our feet. When archaeologists dig into the earth, they are not just searching for artifacts, they are reading layers of time. Each stratum of soil is a page in the book of history. The deeper you dig, the older the story becomes. But here's the curious part. Sometimes they uncover layers that don't make sense. Cities build upon cities. Rome rests on foundations that go meters deep. Istanbul sits atop the ruins of Constantinople, which itself was built on the even older Byzantium. In some cases, forgetting becomes intentional. New rulers may actively discourage discussion of the old world, especially if comparisons make their own reign look less impressive. Religious authorities may declare the old world sinful or cursed, warning people away from studying it. Fear also plays a role. If a collapse was traumatic enough, survivors may avoid remembering it, afraid it could happen again. The result is collective amnesia. A society consciously turns away from its past, and within a surprisingly short time, perhaps only 3 or 4 generations, almost everything is forgotten. The old world becomes a hazy memory, then a legend, then a myth, and finally nothing. Astronomical alignments of ancient structures. One of the strangest and most enduring mysteries of megalithic monuments is their precise astronomical orientation. Across the world, from Egypt to Mexico, from England to Cambodia, ancient builders aligned their monuments with astonishing accuracy to the sun, moon, and stars. The Great Pyramid of Giza is aligned to true north within 1/15 of a degree. Its sides are nearly perfect parallels to lines of latitude and longitude. Corridors inside point to specific stars as they appeared thousands of years ago. How did the builders achieve such precision without modern instruments? Stonehenge in England is aligned with the sunrise at the summer solstice and the sunset at the winter solstice. Its stones form a precise calendar tracking the seasons. But Stonehenge is not unique. Across Europe, megalithic structures show similar alignments. In Mesoamerica, the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan aligns with a point on the horizon where the sun sets on a specific date. The temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza creates a shadow effect during the equinox, appearing as a serpent descending the pyramid steps. The Maya calendar was astonishingly accurate, tracking Venus cycles, lunar months, and solar years with mathematical precision. Angkor Wat in Cambodia is not only aligned with the sunrise, but the entire temple complex functions as an astronomical observatory, tracking the movements of the sun and moon throughout the year. The standard explanation is that ancient people depended on the heavens for agriculture and navigation, so naturally they studied the stars. Over time, they developed complex calendars and embedded astronomical knowledge into their architecture. That makes sense, but a deeper question remains: why such precision? For farming, an alignment within a few degrees would have been sufficient. Why strive for near-perfect accuracy? One possibility is that these structures were more than temples or tombs. They may have been observatories, but also repositories of knowledge. Astronomical alignments could encode information, dates, cycles, predictions in a form that would survive generations even without written records. If a civilization knew resets occurred, it may have tried to preserve critical knowledge in the most durable form possible: massive stone monuments embedded with astronomical data. Future generations, even if they forgot the original language or technology, could still read the skies and, by following the instructions carved into stone, rediscover lost knowledge. This idea is not as far-fetched as it sounds. We know ancient cultures used myths and rituals to transmit practical information. Australian Aboriginal stories encode navigation routes, water sources, and edible plants. What if megalithic structures served a similar purpose, not just monuments, but messages to the future? Oddities in language families. Language evolves, branches, and changes over time. Linguists can trace language families back to common ancestors. The Indo-European family, for example, includes most European languages, Persian, Hindi, and others, all descending from a shared proto-language thousands of years ago. But there are anomalies. Isolated languages that seem unrelated to any known family. Basque in Spain is one such case. Surrounded by Indo-European tongues, it is entirely different, with no known relatives. Where did it come from? Sumerian, one of the earliest written languages, is also an isolate. Despite thousands of tablets and extensive literature, we cannot link it to any other language family. It appears fully formed in Mesopotamian records, with no visible predecessors. There are also curious similarities between languages that should not be connected. Some researchers point to parallels between ancient tongues from different continents, separated by oceans. These are usually dismissed as coincidence or convergent evolution. But what if they are traces of a shared, much older language spoken before the last reset? The idea of language is not a fringe theory. Linguists understand that all modern languages descend from earlier forms of speech. The question is, how far back can we trace them, officially? Reconstruction reaches about 6,000 to 10,000 years. Beyond that, the trail grows to faint. But what if language is far older? Anatomically, modern humans have existed for around 300,000 years. We know they had the capacity for complex speech at least 50,000 years ago, likely much longer. That means tens of thousands of years of oral communication, most of which left no trace. If resets occurred, each would have erased most linguistic records. Survivors would have spoken simplified versions of older tongues or created new ones from fragments. Over time, these languages would evolve, branch, and become unrecognizable compared to their ancestors. Isolated languages today may be remnants, the last carriers of tongues once widespread, now surviving only in pockets after collapse. Similarities between unrelated language families could be echoes of a deep, shared past. Genetic memory of catastrophe. Genetic research offers a remarkable window into humanity's past. By analyzing DNA from people worldwide, scientists can trace migrations, mixing, and population changes thousands of years back. And what they find is sometimes strange. Around 70,000 years ago, genetic data shows that the human population shrank dramatically. Estimates suggest only a few thousand reproductive individuals survived. This is known as a population bottleneck. And it left an indelible mark in human DNA, All living humans today descend from that small group of survivors. What caused the bottleneck? The leading theory is the eruption of the Toba supervolcano in Indonesia, which triggered a volcanic winter lasting years. Skies would have darkened, temperatures dropped, plants died, and food chains collapsed. Humanity nearly went extinct. But there are other mysterious patterns. In human genes, several additional bottlenecks appear in different groups at different times, suggesting regional catastrophes. Certain genetic lineages vanish abruptly from the record, hinting that entire populations were wiped out. Even more intriguing, human genetic diversity is unusually low compared to other species. To random chimpanzees from different parts of Africa can be more genetically distinct than to humans from opposite ends of the globe. This suggests humanity endured multiple severe population crashes that erased much of our genetic variety. Genetic memory is not just statistics. Some researchers propose that traumatic events can leave epigenetic marks, changes in how genes are expressed without altering the DNA itself. These changes can sometimes be passed to children, creating a literal genetic memory of trauma. If global catastrophes occurred in human history, they must have been deeply traumatic for survivors. Generations would have lived under their shadow. Perhaps some of our deepest fears of darkness, heights, water, or isolation are not merely evolutionary adaptations, but echoes of ancient disasters encoded in our genes, impossible artifacts in the wrong layers. Sometimes archaeologists find things that should not exist, objects too advanced for their time, or discovered in geological strata that make their age impossible. These are called out-of-place artifacts or anachronisms. Most turn out to be mistakes, misdating, contamination, or modern items accidentally mixed with ancient layers. But some are harder to explain. The London hammer, for example, was found in rock dated to roughly 400 million years ago. The hammer itself is clearly much younger. Humans didn't exist then. How did it get there? Skeptics argue the rock formed later around the hammer through concretion. Perhaps, but some researchers remain unconvinced. The Klerksdorp spheres from South Africa, metal spheres with parallel grooves, found in rocks 2.8 billion years old. Official explanation: natural formation from volcanic activity and erosion. But the shape and grooves appear suspiciously manufactured. The Baghdad battery, the clay jar containing a copper cylinder and an iron rod, found in Iraq, dated to roughly 200 BC. Filled with acid or alkaline solution, it generates a small voltage. This is an ancient battery. What was it used for? Official archaeology suggests a scroll container or ritual object. Yet its design resembles a modern galvanic cell. Ica stones in Peru. Thousands of stones carved with dinosaurs, advanced medical procedures, and technology. Skeptics claim most are modern fakes, and strong evidence supports that. But one collector claimed to find them in ancient tombs. Even if a fraction are genuine, they raise troubling questions. Metal pipes found in coal seams millions of years old. Footprints in petrified mud far older than possible. Gold chains embedded in coal blocks. Each discovery is disputed, often justifiably. Yet the pattern is unsettling. If even one or two are genuine, it implies our understanding of history is incomplete. It would mean advanced civilizations existed far earlier than thought and were erased so thoroughly that only the strangest anomalies remain. Role of isolated societies as preservers. While large civilizations rise and fall, small isolated societies often survive. They live in remote mountains, deep jungles, far islands, or extreme deserts. When disaster strikes the developed world, these groups often survive due to protected isolation. This is not just theory. We've seen it in recent history when European diseases decimated Native American populations. Some remote tribes survived untouched. When civilizations collapsed from war or famine, mountain villages or island communities can continue life as if nothing changed. After a reset, isolated societies become custodians. They preserve skills, stories, and traditions of the old world, even if they do not fully understand them. Their myths may contain echoes of advanced knowledge. Their rituals may be simplified versions of complex practices. Anthropologists sometimes encounter this A tribe in Papua New Guinea practices a ritual that seems purposeless, but when studied, it encodes practical knowledge about navigation or agriculture. Oral history passed for generations seems fantastical, but contains accurate descriptions of geological events. If resets occurred, the most valuable keys may not be in the ruins of great cities, but in the oral traditions of small isolated groups that survived when everyone else perished. These societies are often considered primitive or undeveloped. But this is a misconception. They developed ways of life perfectly adapted to their environment. And their knowledge is the result of millennia of experience. They may live simply by choice or necessity, not from lack of ability. This makes them relevant to resets. Simplicity is survival. Complex civilizations are fragile. Isolated self-sufficient societies are resilient. When all else collapses, they endure. And through them, threads of old knowledge are carried into a new world. Time as the enemy of truth. The greatest obstacle to understanding resets is time itself. The further back an event lies, the harder it is to see clearly. Evidence decays, memories fade, interpretations pile upon interpretations until the original truth is no longer visible. Think about how quickly this happens even with recent history. Events just a century old are already wrapped in myth and misinterpretation. People disagree about what truly happened, why it happened, and who was responsible. And that's with photographs, video, and written documents. Now imagine trying to understand events thousands or even tens of thousands of years ago. Physical evidence has almost vanished. Written records, if they ever existed, have long since decayed. Oral traditions have passed through hundreds of generations, changing each time. What remains are shadows, hints of something that once was, now almost invisible. Time is the perfect killer of evidence. It leaves no obvious trace of its work. It simply, slowly, relentlessly erases everything. And with each passing year, the past grows more obscure, more uncertain, more open to interpretation. This creates a fundamental problem. If resets occurred tens of thousands of years ago, how could we ever know? The evidence would be so degraded, so fragmented, that even if we found it, we might not recognize what it was. We might interpret it as a natural formation, an error, or something too ambiguous to draw conclusions from. The paradox of evidence: the older the event, the more important it would be to know about it, but the less evidence survives to study. The most critical chapters of human history may be precisely those about which we know the least. Solar cycles and magnetic reversals. Earth is not isolated in space. It is constantly bathed in radiation from the sun, shielded by a magnetic field that deflects charged particles. But both the sun and Earth's magnetic field change over time, sometimes dramatically. The sun goes through activity cycles roughly every 11 years. At solar maximum, it produces more flares and coronal mass ejections, bursts of energy and matter hurled into space. When one of these is directed at Earth, it can trigger geomagnetic storms that disrupt satellites, power grids, and communications. The Carrington event of 1859 was the largest recorded solar storm. It produced auroras visible as far south as the Caribbean and induced electric currents in telegraph wires that shocked operators. If a similar storm struck today, the damage would be catastrophic. Transformers would burn out, satellites would fail. GPS, the internet, mobile networks all could be disrupted for months. But solar storms can be far worse. Ice cores and tree rings show evidence of much stronger events in the past. One, dated to around 775 CE, was dozens of times more powerful than the Carrington event. Another occurred around 660 BC. If such a storm happened today, it could trigger exactly the kind of global digital blackout described earlier. Earth's magnetic field adds another layer of vulnerability. The field is not static, it drifts, weakens, and periodically flips entirely. Magnetic poles switch places. This is called a geomagnetic reversal. Reversals have happened hundreds of times in Earth's history, the last about 780,000 years ago. The process can take thousands to tens of thousands of years. During a reversal, the magnetic field weakens, sometimes almost to zero. This exposes Earth's surface to increased cosmic radiation and solar winds. The effects on civilization would be serious. Elevated radiation would impact health, especially cancer risks. Satellites would fail more quickly. Navigation systems that rely on the magnetic field would stop working. Animals that use magnetism to migrate would be disoriented. Some researchers suggest that past magnetic reversals may have coincided with mass extinctions or evolutionary shifts. The evidence is inconclusive, but the possibility is unsettling. If a reversal occurred during the existence of an advanced civilization, it could have seriously destabilized society, especially one dependent on technology. Current data shows that Earth's magnetic field is weakening. It has lost about 10% of its strength in the last 170 years. The South Atlantic anomaly, an area where the field is particularly weak, is expanding. Some scientists wonder if this could be an early sign of an approaching reversal. If so, it will not happen tomorrow. But in the context of resets, it is a reminder: cosmic forces we barely understand could destabilize our civilization without warning. Hidden knowledge in sacred texts. Religious and sacred writings are often dismissed as purely symbolic or spiritual, without historical or scientific value. Yet many contain descriptions of events that sound strikingly specific. The book of Genesis describes a great flood that wipes out humanity, with Noah saving animals and his family on an ark. The story is exaggerated and symbolic in its presentation, but the flood is not unique to the Bible. The Epic of Gilgamesh, written centuries earlier in Mesopotamia, tells an almost identical tale. Utnapishtim, the hero of the Sumerian version, builds a boat, survives a catastrophic flood, and sends out birds to find land. The similarity is too close to be coincidence. Both stories likely stem from a much older common source, a memory of a real flood that devastated the region. Archaeological evidence shows Mesopotamia experienced several catastrophic floods in antiquity. One around 2900 BC left a layer of sediment pointing to a massive inundation. Indian Vedic texts describe cycles of creation and destruction spanning millions of years. The concept of yugas, ages, each progressively more degenerate, suggests a cyclical nature of time. It is philosophy, but it also mirrors the pattern we see in history: rise, peak, decline, reset. The book of Revelation in the Bible describes apocalyptic events: earthquakes, falling stars, a darkened sun, seas turning to blood. Often read as prophecy or allegory, some passages sound like memories of real catastrophes. Falling stars could be meteor showers or asteroid impacts. A darkened sun could be volcanic winter. Seas turning to blood could be algal blooms or pollution from massive undersea eruptions. The Quran mentions ancient peoples as Thamud, the people of Lot destroyed for their sins. These stories are often interpreted morally, but they may also refer to real civilizations lost to natural disasters. Some archaeologists identify it with Ubar, an ancient city in Oman said to have been swallowed by the sands. Excavations revealed ruins buried under dunes, suggesting the city was indeed abandoned suddenly. Buddhist texts describe kalpas, vast cycles of time, each ending with the destruction of the world by fire, water, or wind. This is spiritual cosmology, but again it reflects the idea that worlds rise and vanish. The pattern across all these texts is the same: destruction, survival, renewal. The world ends, but a few remain to begin again. These may not be prophecies of the future, but memories of the past read through religious lenses. The role of chance in preserving evidence. One reason it is so difficult to find proof of ancient cities is that in the Near East, archaeologists have uncovered up to 20 different settlement layers stacked atop one another, spanning thousands of years. Each layer tells a story of rise, prosperity, and collapse. People arrived, built, lived for generations, and then something went wrong: war, disease, famine, climate shift. The city emptied, buildings crumbled, and over time wind and water buried the ruins in soil and sand. Years or centuries later, a new group arrived and built directly on top, unaware that beneath their feet lay an entire world. This happened again and again. In some places, the layers are so tightly packed that it is difficult to tell where one era ends and another begins. Artifacts mix, Dating becomes uncertain. And here is the uncomfortable question. If we can find 20 layers of civilization in one place, how many more layers remain undiscovered? How many lie too deep to excavate, or buried beneath oceans, deserts, glaciers? There are regions of Earth where archaeology has barely scratched the surface. Vast areas of the Amazon, Siberia, and African jungles remain almost unexplored. LiDAR technology, which uses lasers to map land beneath dense vegetation, recently revealed thousands of previously unknown structures in the jungles of Central America, entire Maya cities. And seen for centuries, hidden beneath the trees. If this happens in places we thought we knew well, then what else might be hidden in regions we have barely explored? How many civilizations could have risen and vanished in those areas, leaving behind ruins that no one will ever find? The most unsettling thought: oceans cover more than 70% of Earth's surface, and we have explored less than 20% of the seafloor. If earlier civilizations built along coastlines as we do, and if sea levels rose, as they have many times in Earth's history, then most of their cities are now at the bottom of the ocean, buried under layers of sediment. We may never discover them. Anomalies in the official chronology. Official history is presented as a complete picture of dates, events, causes, and consequences, all neatly arranged. But when you look closer, cracks appear, small inconsistencies, strange details that don't fit. They are usually ignored or explained away, but they remain like splinters in the constructed narrative. Take the pyramids of Giza. Officially, they are about 4,500 years old, built as tombs for pharaohs. But there is a problem with this story. Geological studies of the Sphinx show signs of water erosion, deep vertical grooves that could only have been formed by long periods of heavy rainfall. Egypt has not received such rains in the last 5,000 years. If the Sphinx's erosion is truly water-based, it means the statue is far older than we are told. That raises another question. If the ancient Egyptians did not build the Sphinx, then who did? And if the Sphinx is older, perhaps the pyramids are too. Inside the Great Pyramid are details difficult to explain even with modern technology. Stone blocks are fitted so precisely that a razor blade cannot slip between them. Some stones weigh more than 70 tons, lifted to heights of dozens of meters. The internal corridors are aligned with astronomical precision. How could a civilization said to have only copper tools and wooden levers achieve this? The standard explanation: massive labor forces, ingenious engineering, time, and patience. Perhaps. But there is another possibility. What if the pyramid builders had access to technologies or knowledge from an earlier epoch? What if they were not inventing these methods, but rediscovering them? Or consider Tiwanaku in Bolivia, an ancient city high in the Andes. Its ruins include massive stone gateways carved from single blocks of andesite weighing more than 10 tons. The surfaces are so flat and smooth they resemble machine work. Some stones are joined with complex cuts and interlocking shapes, fitted together with astonishing precision without mortar. Official dating places Tiwanaku around 500 CE. But geological and astronomical studies suggest parts of it may be far older, perhaps 12,000 years. Some stones show signs of long weathering inconsistent with an age of only 1,500 years. And the city was built on the shore of what was once a lake, whose water level shifted thousands of years ago. Then there is Yamaguni, off the coast of Japan. A submerged structure with terraces, steps, and right angles lies about 25 meters underwater. Some geologists argue it is natural. Others point to too many regular shapes, too many straight lines. If it was man-made, it must have been built when sea levels were much lower, over 10,000 years ago. These anomalies are inconvenient for the official chronology. They suggest that advanced civilizations may have existed far earlier than we are told, or that history did not unfold as linearly as we imagine. Technological leaps without predecessors. In history, there are moments when technology seems to appear out of nowhere. No gradual development, no series of incremental improvements, just the sudden emergence of something fully formed. This is strange. Technology usually evolves. You see crude early versions, then refinements over time. But sometimes, that is not what we find. Writing in summer appears around 30 to 100 BC. It emerges almost instantly. The earliest examples are already quite complex. There is no long phase of experimentation with different systems. It is as if someone simply decided to begin writing one day, and the system was already complete. The same is true of metallurgy. Copper tools appear in the archaeological record rather suddenly. In several regions, the process of smelting metal from ore is anything but simple. It requires control of high temperatures, an understanding of chemistry, and specialized furnaces. How could hunter-gatherers or early farmers have figured this out? The usual explanation is accidental discovery. Perhaps someone noticed that certain rocks melted in a hot fire. Maybe, but the leap from observation to functional metallurgy is enormous. Glass is another example. Producing glass requires heating sand to over 1700 C. Early glass beads date to about 3,500 years ago in Mesopotamia and Egypt. How did ancient people achieve such temperatures? They had to build specialized furnaces, control fuel, and understand materials. Where did this knowledge come from? A recurring pattern appears again and again. Technologies arise in multiple places at roughly the same time, even when those places had no known contact. The Bronze Age begins in the Near East, Europe, Asia, and North Africa within the same time window. It is as if the idea spread rapidly. Yet we have no records of how this happened. There are two ways to explain this. The first, humans are truly ingenious, and when conditions are right, different groups independently invent the same things. This is entirely possible. The second explanation, what if these technologies were not new at all? What if they were rediscovered knowledge that once existed, lost during a reset, and then slowly recovered? The idea of knowledge transmission through dark ages is not new. We know it happened with Greek and Roman texts during Europe's Middle Ages. Many works were lost in the West but preserved in the Islamic world, then translated back into Europe centuries later. If this could happen over a few centuries, why not across millennia? Lost libraries and burned archives. Knowledge is fragile not only because materials decay, but because humans destroy it. Whether intentional or accidental, libraries burn, archives vanish, entire systems of knowledge are erased in an instant. The Library of Alexandria is the most famous example. At its height, it may have contained hundreds of thousands of scrolls gathered from across the known world. Scholars traveled from everywhere to study there. It was the greatest repository of knowledge in the ancient world. Then it disappeared. The exact cause is still debated: fires, wars, neglect. But the result was the same: almost everything was lost. We know the names of some works that were stored there: complete histories of nations, scientific treatises, maps, philosophical texts. All gone, irretrievably. What we know of the ancient world is only a tiny fraction of what was once recorded. Most of it simply vanished. And Alexandria was not the only case. The Library of Baghdad, the House of Wisdom, was destroyed during the Mongol invasion in 1258. It is said the Tigris River ran black with ink of scrolls thrown into the water. How much knowledge was lost then we will never know. In Mesoamerica, Spanish conquistadors burned Maya codices as pagan works. Thousands of documents containing history, astronomy, medicine, calendars all destroyed. Today only 4 Maya codices survive. 4 out of an unknown number of thousands. Even in modern times, knowledge continues to be lost. During World War II, bombings destroyed countless libraries and archives. Poland's National Library lost hundreds of thousands of books and manuscripts. Vietnam's Imperial Archive was ruined. These losses are permanent. Now imagine a global collapse. Not a local war or a single fire, but systemic failure of civilization. Without electricity, without organized protection, without ways to preserve or transport materials, nearly every library, museum, and archive would be vulnerable. Fire, water, looting, decay would erase records in a very short time. Digital records are no better. In fact, they are more fragile. Without electricity, servers fail. Hard drives degrade. Cloud storage disappears without functioning data centers. And even if physical disks survive, who could read them thousands of years from now? File formats change every few decades. Computers of the future may have no way to decode our data, even if they find the storage devices. Climate shifts as triggers of resets. When we think of catastrophes, we imagine sudden dramatic events, asteroids, volcanoes, earthquakes. But one of the most powerful and insidious threats is climate change. It does not happen in a single day, yet it can dismantle a civilization as thoroughly as any instant disaster. Earth's climate is unstable. It has never been constant. Ice ages come and go. Temperatures rise and fall. Rainfall patterns shift. Entire regions transform from fertile to desert, or from dry to flooded, within centuries or even decades. Human civilizations depend on predictable climate. Farms need the right amount of rain. Cities require sources of fresh water. Trade routes rely on passable roads and navigable rivers. When climate changes, all of this can collapse. History is full of examples of civilizations destroyed by climate shifts. The classic Maya collapsed around 900 CE, coinciding with a series of severe droughts. Without reliable water, agriculture failed. Cities were abandoned. Central authority dissolved. It took centuries for the region to recover. The Harappan civilization in the Indus Valley, one of the earliest urban cultures, disappeared around 1900 BC. The exact cause isn't clear. But climate data shows monsoon rains shifted eastward. Rivers dried up or changed course. Without water, the cities died. In Mesopotamia, the Akkadian Empire, one of the first great states in history, collapsed around 2200 BC. Recent studies show this coincided with a sudden 300-year drought. Crops failed, famine spread, and social structures unraveled. The Little Ice Age, lasting roughly from 1300 to 1850 CE, brought cold winters and poor summers across Europe. Harvests failed, food prices soared, famine became common. It fueled social unrest, wars, and even the collapse of governments. And these are only the last few thousand years. Looking further back, climate becomes even more unstable. The end of the last ice age, about 20,000 years ago, was a time of immense change. Temperatures rose, glaciers melted, sea levels climbed by tens of meters, entire landscapes transformed. If complex civilizations existed then, they would have faced unprecedented challenges. Coastal cities would have been drowned, fertile lands swallowed by forests or turned to desert. Trade routes would have been severed. Even the most advanced societies would have struggled to adapt. The key point: climate shifts do not necessarily wipe out humanity entirely. They dismantle civilizations, they scatter populations, force people to abandon cities, and return to simpler ways of life. Knowledge is lost, advanced technologies forgotten. The next generation begins again, building on the ruins of what came before. Disease as an eraser of civilizations, war and natural disasters receive most of the attention when we talk about resets, but disease can be even more devastating. It does not destroy buildings or landscapes, but it can erase populations and with them, all the knowledge they carry. The Black Death in the 14th century killed roughly 1/3 of Europe's population. Entire villages vanished, cities emptied. So many died so quickly that there were not enough people left to bury the dead. The economy collapsed, trade halted, social structures fell apart. It took generations for Europe to recover. But the Black Death was not the deadliest pandemic in history. The Justinian plague in the 6th century CE ravaged the Byzantine Empire and surrounding regions. Estimates suggest it killed up to half the population in some areas. An empire at the height of its power was suddenly weakened. The cultural and economic consequences were felt for centuries. Further back, we know from ancient texts of plagues and epidemics that devastated cities. The plague of Athens during the Peloponnesian War killed 1/4 of the army and population of Athens. The Antonini plague in the 2nd century CE claimed millions of lives across the Roman Empire. These are only the pandemics we know of because someone recorded them. How many others occurred in prehistoric times? How many civilizations were erased by outbreaks of disease? leaving no record at all. What makes disease especially dangerous for civilization is that it targets people directly. War kills mostly soldiers. Famine affects everyone, but slowly. Disease can kill quickly and indiscriminately. Doctors, engineers, teachers, craftsmen, all the specialists who keep a civilization functioning are just as vulnerable as anyone else when they die. Their knowledge dies with them. Imagine a pandemic far worse than any in recorded history. Not 30% mortality, but 80 or 90. Not confined to one region, but global. Modern interconnectedness, which makes us strong, also makes us vulnerable. Disease could spread worldwide in days through air travel. After such an event, survivors would be scattered, traumatized, unable to maintain complex systems. Cities would become graveyards, factories would fall silent. Without enough people to run power grids, communications, and water supplies, infrastructure would collapse within months. The world would return to conditions unseen for centuries, underwater cities and drowned lands. More than 70% of Earth's surface is covered by water, and sea level has never been constant. During ice ages, vast amounts of water were locked in glaciers, and sea level was 120 meters lower than today. When the ice melted, oceans rose, swallowing coastal plains. This is not theory, it is geological fact. That means vast areas of land once dry and habitable are now underwater. If people lived on those lands, and why wouldn't they? Since coasts have always attracted settlement, their towns and villages are now submerged. Doggerland is the best example. It was a landmass the size of Britain, connecting modern England to continental Europe. You could walk from London to Amsterdam across dry land. The region was flat, with rivers, lakes, and abundant wildlife. Archaeological finds on the seabed show that people lived there for thousands of years. Then, around 8,000 years ago, Doggerland began to flood. Rising seas gradually consumed the land. The situation worsened with an undersea landslide off Norway, which triggered a massive tsunami. Any remaining settlements would have been swept away. Today Doggerland is Dogger Bank, a shallow area in the North Sea. Fishing nets sometimes pull up mammoth bones, tools, and other signs of human activity. Similar stories exist worldwide. The Gulf of Cambay off India's west coast contains underwater structures that some researchers believe are the remains of an ancient city. Sonar scans reveal what looks like a grid of streets and buildings at a depth of about 40 meters. If it is a real city, it must have been submerged more than 9,000 years ago. The coasts of Japan, the Mediterranean, the Persian Gulf, and Southeast Asia all contain underwater anomalies. Some are natural formations, but others show patterns that make researchers wonder. The challenge of studying underwater ruins, it is difficult and expensive. Most archaeology is carried out on land, where digging and documentation are easier. The ocean floor is vast, largely unmapped, and requires specialized equipment to explore, even when discoveries are made. They are hard to date or interpret, yet if resets truly occurred, the oceans hold the most important evidence. Coastal civilizations that thrived thousands of years ago would now lie beneath the waves. Their buildings are covered in sand and coral, slowly eroded by currents. Their artifacts are scattered across the seabed. Most will never be found. The psychology of forgetting. When a civilization collapses, the first instinct of survivors is to forget, not deliberately, but out of necessity. The trauma of collapse, hunger, violence, and loss is so intense that many want to push it away. The younger generation, born afterward, has no direct memory of the old world. They hear stories, but those stories are filtered through the pain of their parents. Over time, details fade. The old world begins to feel unreal, almost mythical. People focus on the present, on survival, on rebuilding. The past becomes less important. Why cling to memories of a world that no longer exists? This process is reinforced by practical realities. After collapse, survivors live for simpler lives. There is no leisure to sit and write histories, no materials to record them on. Most time is spent finding food, building shelter, defending against threats. Oral tradition dominates, but oral tradition is imperfect. Psychologists who study trauma know that people treat memories in strange ways. Some suppress them entirely, others distort them, making them less painful. Still others mythologize them, turning them into stories with morals or lessons. All of these processes warp what truly happened. Within a few generations, the original witnesses are gone. New generations know only the stories told by grandparents, who themselves heard them from their grandparents. Details blur. Chronology tangles. Events merge or vanish. What remains is the skeleton of a story barely recognizable as what once was. Conclusion: a voice from the past. If history has truly been reset more than once, it changes everything, not only our view of the past, but our place in time. We are not at the beginning of history. We are in the middle of a loop that has already turned many times before, and will turn again. Perhaps the true lesson of this idea is humility. We are not the first, and we will not be the last. Our age, with all its achievements, is only one layer among many, destined to fade like those before it. And one day, far in the future, someone else may stand where we stand now, wondering how many times the story of the world has been told, erased, and told again. Perhaps the voices of the past are already singing this song to us. Through myths, scattered ruins, and strange artifacts, they whisper of cycles of rises and falls, of worlds that once were and are no more. And if we listen closely enough, we may hear the warning: nothing is eternal, not even a civilization that believes itself indestructible. As the waves wash over the sunken cities, and the wind sweeps across abandoned lands, remember this: every end carries the seed of a new beginning. Every forgotten story waits to be rediscovered. The past and future dance together, endlessly, in a rhythm older than humanity itself. If this tale stirred your imagination, leave a like and subscribe so you never miss another journey through the hidden histories of our world. May your thoughts drift gently tonight, filled with wonder, curiosity, and the whispers of civilizations long gone.